Your position on Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister, what do you think?
My position's been very clear since I signed a letter in October, and that is that I think it's time for the Prime Minister to move on. He's in that range of years where there's this kind of organic thing that happens in Canadian politics, at least in my lifetime, where after about 9 or 10 years, people reach a point where they're seeking change and they're looking for change. And we're at that point right now. I think the polls clearly show that. They've shown it for quite some time now. Almost a year, for more than a year, the polls have been trending in the wrong direction for the Prime Minister and the government. And I think Canadians have been very vocal about seeking and wanting to see that change. And my constituents have been very clear here in Hamilton East, Stoney Creek, in terms of seeking the same. And you can just feel it out in the community. And so I think, for those of us who are asking for the change, there's one common denominator here, and that is the prospect of a Pierre Poilievre government. And I think that his fix the budget slogan that he has means a number of things for Canadians. It likely means the end of the dental program. It'll mean the end of the housing programs that we have in place. It'll mean the end of the $10 a day childcare initiative. All those social supports that have been built up over the last decade will likely be dismantled. And that's the way that the system works. That's fine. But I think for those of us who think that those programs are important, we'd like to ensure that that doesn't happen. And I think the only way for that to happen is that the Liberal Party have a new leader.
So should Trudeau step down or call an election? What exactly do you want?
Well, ideally, we'd like to see him step aside and start a leadership process that would allow others to come forward and put their name in the hat and provide a new platform for the government to move forward, to implement the change that Canadians are looking for, and to ensure that when an election is called in 2025, that we have someone who's going to be able to compete with Mr. Poilievre and the other parties to ensure that the programs that and the legislation that we've enacted over the last decade are not undone, and that those social supports remain there for Canadians for years to come.
Okay. So if the Conservatives should get elected and remove those social supports, as you fear, would that be Trudeau's responsibility?
Well, I mean, he's reading the polls like everyone else, and I don't know what's going through the Prime Minister's mind right now in terms of what motivates him to keep going. I certainly, I think his heart's in the right place in terms of, and I think history is going to be very kind to the Prime Minister in terms of all the work that he's done on climate change, the work that he's done for reconciliation. It's the first time the federal government's invested in housing in the last 30 years, and so there's a long list of accomplishments that the Prime Minister has, I think, to boast and brag about for, the time that he's on this earth. But we've reached a point where Canadians have tuned him out, and I believe that it's time for the party and the government to choose a new leader and go into a new direction.
Is there anything specific that he's done wrong?
Well, in terms of legislation-wise?
Or policies, or his handling of things?
Well, I think I think all governments make mistakes. There's no doubt about that. I've made mistakes in my own personal life and in my life as an elected representative, so I don't think anyone's imperfect in that regard. But I do believe that, going back to history in terms of just that organic desire for change, I think we've reached that point now in terms of people, once a federal government's been in office in Canada for that 9 to 10 years, and I can go back in time for the time that I've been alive, you'll see that after that 9 or 10 year point, there is just the natural desire for someone new and a change. And I think as Canadians look at what their choices are in 2025 as we enter an election, they're going to have three choices: Mr. Singh, Mr. Poilievre, or Mr. Trudeau. And if I believe the polls to be true, and the only poll, of course, that means anything is the poll and the election results on election day. But I think if the trend continues in terms of where we've been at for the last year with some of the by-election losses and some of the polling numbers that we're seeing across the country, I don't think there's a chance that the Prime Minister is re-elected as the Prime Minister. Okay,
so let me ask you about that. If Pierre Poilievre is successful in forcing an election, where would the Liberals be after the election, do you think?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball to guess in terms of where the party's at after the election. I think that, the fear for us is Mr. Poilievre's made it very clear that he has a Make Canada Great Again agenda. That includes a lot of things that we're seeing from the South in terms of a lot of the buzzwords and phrases that he's using. he's adopting here in Canada. He's talking about common sense conservatives, and when I hear common sense conservatives, I think back to the Mike Harris days and the common sense revolution here in Ontario. I was a new councillor in the mid-90s when that happened. And that agenda meant cuts to social programs. It meant downloading for municipalities. It meant undermining the efforts of unions and the collective bargaining agreements across the province. And I think that's what Canada has in store for it with the Poilievre government.
Okay. So what about this suggestion from Angus Reid that the Liberals, if there were an election under Trudeau now, the Liberals could be down to 10 seats?
Yeah, it's quite possible. It's quite possible that we're that low. But I would say that we still have a lot of time remaining over the next 6 to 8 months to choose a new leader, to go in a new direction, to present a platform and a vision for Canadians that competes with the other parties and rivals the other parties and gives the government a chance to ensure that the programs and the policies that we've put in place over the last decade are protected, and we provide that social safety net for seniors, people with disabilities, and families. They're very important programs, and I'll reiterate it again. If there is a Conservative Poilievre government, we're going to see the end, if not the dismantling, of all of those social programs.
Okay. So you signed the letter. Is it 23 signatures or is it 24?
I think it was 24 at the time.
24.
Yeah.
In your caucus meetings, I don't know, like it's confidential, but whatever you can say, how many MPs do you think want Trudeau to step aside?
Well, we had 24 in October was the number, and I know that there are a lot of my colleagues who are a little bit fearful in terms of coming out right now or then coming out through the summer months into the fall. I think as we've seen, we've heard from the public, we're seeing some of the results from some of the other by-elections that are occurring. We're seeing some of the polling numbers that are coming out. And this just wait scenario, this, things can only get better. I don't buy into some of the comments that, the Prime Minister has said to Caucus in terms of just give it a bit of time. We've had a lot of time to see things turn around, and they haven't. And I think now's the time that the Prime Minister has to give serious consideration about resigning and stepping aside and allowing someone else to take the helm and put the government in a new direction.
So we're hearing that they're just saying 40, 50,
it's anyone's guess right now. But if we're a lot more than 24 or 25 now. If I had to guess, we're probably up to 50 to 60 to 70 members. But until they come out publicly and share with their constituents and Canadians that they feel the same, we're still at 24.
Okay. What do you think of Trudeau's handling of the Christa Freeland thing last Friday and Monday?
Yeah, I thought it was just in poor taste. Christa has done a lot for the country in terms of her handling of a number of very important files, right? In terms of dealing with the first Trump administration and dealing with the renegotiation of those trade agreements, right? His tweet the other day that took a swipe at her, I think, is all the proof that we need that she won that battle the first time around. He probably didn't like the fact that she was on the verge of being the lead negotiator, likely in the second round of those talks, and I think it's public now in terms of the disagreements that she's had with the Prime Minister, in terms of he's looking to spend a lot more maybe than the government has the ability to support in terms of financial capacity, and she's always been one who's looking to protect the public purse. So I respect her for that, and I think the way it played out the other day was unfortunate, and I think the consequences and the blowback we've seen publicly from across Canada is proof positive that she's a victim in all of this. And I agree with her that the gimmick in terms of the $250 rebates that were proposed were in fact a gimmick, a bit of a political stunt there. The fact that someone could propose to put those out to the public without allowing seniors and people with disabilities to be eligible for that rebate program, I think was a mistake, and I was certainly public with those comments before. And so I just think it's another reason on top of many others that shows that maybe it's time that the Prime Minister step aside.
I will ask you, there is a suggestion that there's some sort of gender issue here because she's a woman and Trudeau's dealings with women. You see anything?
No, I don't think there's anything there. The Prime Minister has been someone who's always made sure that we ensured that we've had parity in cabinet. He's always encouraged more women to run for our party. We have a number of local representatives. I'm sure if you asked Lisa and or Philomena about the Prime Minister's dealings with the women, whether they be in cabinet or in caucus, I think he's been he's done a good job there in terms of promoting women in positions of authority. The fact that Christia has been both the finance minister and the deputy prime minister, I think, is a bit of proof positive there in terms of the objectives that he has. And I don't think there's any merit to those criticisms. At least that's my opinion.
Okay. What do you think of Trudeau's response since? Sort of very limited remarks.
Well, I mean, we're running out of time, right? Every day that passes, we're closer to an election in 2025. And I would point to the United States scenario, right, with when Mr. Biden was, taken out of the race as the Democratic leader and Ms. Harris was substituted as his alternative. The less time someone has to prepare for the 2025 election, it just benefits the other parties. And so I think, for as much as the Prime Minister might want personal time to reflect, I think, it's important for him to understand that, if he is leaving, that we need all the time possible to choose his successor and to come up with a plan that's going to compete in the 2025 election process.
And if he isn't leaving?
If he isn't leaving, I think a lot of people, we have 153 Liberal members, there'll be a lot of people who have important life decisions to make next year with their friends and family, and I think we'll probably see an exodus of members across the country who decide not to run.
Similar to Sean Fraser and other people?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So what if he goes away and reflects, comes back in mid-January and just moves on without really addressing this issue, just remains as Prime Minister and wants to just keep going?
Well, and I think that's to your last question. I think that's where, members will have a decision to make. Do we run for a party that may not be able to compete like the other parties? Do we put our families and friends through that situation? It's a difficult decision that people will have to make. For me, this is my 30th year as an elected representative. I love representing my constituents, not just when I was Ward 5 councillor, but now as the Member of Parliament for the area. It'll be a very tough decision for me to make. Unlikely that I would run as a candidate for the Prime Minister if he's our leader next year, but that's a decision that I have to make in consultation with my friends, families, and supporters.
If you have a new leader, would you run
Absolutely.
for sure?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm looking for. I want to ensure that when we go through an election in 2025, that we have a leader that's going to be able to compete, that has a vision that Canadians can support, has a platform that resonates with not just people in Hamilton East Stoney Creek, but in Hamilton and across the country. And I think the only way for that to happen, obviously, is for the Prime Minister to step aside and allow that process to take place.
Okay. There have been suggestions that you're looking at the mayor's job. Anything to that? Or?
No, I'm happy doing the job I'm doing right now. I know the mayor's position is probably 2 years away. I haven't given thought to that. It was certainly suggested, I think, the last time you guys were here. I'm flattered with the calls and emails of support when that was suggested on air and in the media. But right now I'm busy being the Member of Parliament for Hamilton East Stoney Creek. And there's no shortage of issues to deal with, right? From the housing crisis to the affordability crisis. And that's what's keeping me busy these days, not just in Hamilton, but in Ottawa.
Just a couple more questions
Yeah,
for you.
sure.
So what's going on now with Mr. Trudeau in the position of leadership? Mm-hmm. What's he doing to the party, to the Liberal Party?
In what way?
What is the effect on the party of having this going on?
Well, I think we definitely have a morale issue, right? I mean, he talked, I think his comments last night, and I wasn't at the dinner, but he talked about it being a bit of a family fight, a little bit of conflict in the family, and that certainly happens in families, right? We have these disagreements. We sit around the dinner table at Christmas dinner and talk to extended family about politics, and we have disagreements all the time. The disagreement, though, that we've had with his leadership and where the party goes has been lingering now for over a year. And I would say that the longer that the Prime Minister allows this to fester without coming to some definitive conclusion, likely means that we'll see more people resigning, as we did with Mr. Fraser the other day, and we'll likely see more Liberal candidates publicly disclose that they're not running in the 2025 election. And so it's created some morale issues. It's a distraction, certainly, from all the other important issues that we're dealing with, from housing to affordability to the U.S. relations issue that has dominated the news over the last couple of weeks since Mr. Trump's election. And so we should be spending our time on more important things. But for the longer there's a question about his leadership, it's less time devoted to those other more important issues that Canadians want us to deal with.
Same thing. While this is going on, what's he doing to the country? What's happening to the country?
Well, the House, to be fair, the House is frozen right now in terms of the Conservatives are holding up all legislation with a filibuster on a couple of issues. And so nothing's moving through the House of Commons. We're still, we just released a fall economic statement the other day, and so we'll need other parties' support in terms of keeping Parliament running into the new year and into the spring, where we'll see another budget presented by the government. And so I think it's not holding up business, but it's holding up discussions with other parties and with our members in terms of how we resolve some of the issues that are outstanding. Again, back to housing, back to affordability, back to U.S. relations. Those are all happening concurrent with the question around his leadership. And I just think the Prime Minister owes it to not just his caucus and the government, but to Canadians to be very clear about what his future is in the new year and in the days and weeks to come.
One more thing I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
While this is going on, Donald Trump is sitting
Yes.
in Florida having a great time. He just
Yeah.
puts out his tweets
does,
every day.
yeah, he's-
Canada,
Honeymoon's still
51st
on for
state.
him. Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
What do you make of it?
Well, the ministers thankfully get to deal with Mr. Trump and his new administration. I'm completely supportive of the border security issues that Mr. Trump has raised. He's talked about drugs making their way across the border into the U.S. I'm just as anxious to deal with the illegal gun trade that's coming across Canadian borders into major Canadian cities, right? I mean, we can't wake up most days of the week without hearing about a shooting that's happened in the Toronto area, in Hamilton, in Montreal, and Vancouver. We've seen a record amount of illegal firearms used in our country this year. And so the border discussion that Mr. Trump has prompted is, I think, a very timely one. And it'll benefit Canadians because we're just as anxious to see those illegal firearms stop at the border and make their way back to the U.S. where they belong.
Okay. I know we touched on this. The caucus meeting on Monday night.
Yeah.
What were the MPs saying to Mr. Trudeau?
Well, I can't breach caucus confidentiality, but I can say that lots of discussion about how Ms. Freeland's situation was handled, the whole question of leadership and where we go as a party, and these are just, I think it's another proof positive point to make in terms of it's just lingering, right? These are the same discussions we had in October. These are the same discussions we had last summer, and these are the same discussions we had coming into the new year in 2024.